Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ross Floyd to the stage.
All right, let's get this show started, right? Thank you all for coming out. I know it's cold out, it's a little warmer than yesterday, but still it's a little treacherous, and you could be at home warm under your blankets right now. So thanks for being here. I want to let you know that there will be plenty of time for Q&A at the end, so don't worry too much if you have questions. I'm sure you will. We have a great panel lined up for you as well, so if you don't get the answers from my bit of this presentation, hopefully they've got some for you, or at least you can rage with them. We are living in a strange and exciting times. As you look around, it feels like we're kind of in the future already. So just to give us a little context, we're going to first take a little trip through time. I hope you're down with that. We start in 400 BC. Don't worry, it's not going to be long. This is not going to be a long part of this presentation. We'll speed it up. The Chinese philosopher Mozi creates the first known written account of a camera obscura. If you don't know what a camera obscura is, it's a small hole that projects light through it, either in a box or in a room, which is beautiful if you can actually see that. It's basically a primitive version of a camera. We skip ahead a few thousand years to Johannes Gutenberg, who is credited with inventing the printing press. I'm sure the quill guy was pretty pissed about getting displaced from his job on that one. Yada, 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 the Enlightenment happens, and no one does anything with the camera obscura. It's kind of relegated to a pretty cool party trick. Skip a couple centuries, and we're in the early 1600s, where portable camera obscuras, cool, were likely used by Rembrandt, Vermeer, and the other masters to create their hyper-realistic images. This, in theory, accounts for the massive leap in the sophistication in which the human figure is portrayed. Oop, that's a laser. This is a new toy they gave to me today. In 1760, we have the Industrial Revolution. People go to work for insane hours, not unlike today. In 1789, we have the French Revolution, and Louis and Marie blow a lot of money, and that kicks off the French Revolution. Incidentally, their heads as well. In 1823, roughly 50 years later, we have the first recorded photographic image by Joseph Niepce. I don't know if I said that right. It's a mouthful, but it's a pretty incredible French name. A fun fact about this, I didn't actually see this image until last week. I learned about this in college. I'm not going to tell you how long ago that was. But it's pretty cool to see the first photograph ever created. That is provided courtesy of the University of Texas. They made it available on their website through their museum, which is fantastic. Somewhere between 1835 and 1841, William Henry Fox Talbot creates the first photographic negative. It's printed on paper, and that's pretty cool. He was English. In 1839, a competitor, Louis Daguerre, invents a daguerreotype, which is a direct-to-plate photographic process with no negatives. And this is largely used to document the American Civil War. This is the first war that was ever photographed. This image is obviously created by AI because the exposures were so long. There were no action shots back then. Generally, it was a bunch of guys lying in the field after it was over, which is kind of grim and gruesome. So I kind of prefer this revision, right? From the 1870s onward, there's a massive spike in innovation in photography and film. In 1867, the same time, the Impressionist movement kicks off. And this is defined, I'm sure you're aware of it, but it's defined by the desire to shed conservative norms and capture a moment in time through the use of color and light. Sound familiar? This is like my favorite slide in this whole thing because it has a great story with it. In 1878, we have the Edward Muybridge animal motion experiments. He conducts a study with an array of 20 cameras to capture a horse in stride. Because of a wager, this is true, he made this like kind of crazy experiment where he had a horse with these little airbags on its feet, and the airbags moved these little needles on this kind of rolling cylinder, and that graphed the movement of their feet. Through that, he theorized that the horse would stand on one leg at one point during its stride, and people thought he was nuts, right? So he made a bet with this other guy, and then he put this whole camera array together to prove it, and it was true. And that caused like a media sensation, basically going viral in the 1800s, which is wild. In 1888, 10 years later, Edison and his assistant William Dixon invent the kinetoscope and the kinetograph, the first motion picture and camera viewer. Now, one thing you should know about this is AI is really bad at making photos of machines and objects, or at least the AI tools that I used. So the kinetograph is like a box that you look into and you kind of crank, and that's how you see the image. It's like a single person viewer for movies. In 1895, inspired by Edison's invention, Auguste and Louis Lumière invent the cinematograph, which is the first movie projector, the first of many. There's a ton that kind of explode after that. There's hundreds that follow. In 1900, now we're getting close to our century, right? That's pretty good. Kodak introduces the Brownie camera, which is the first camera to make photography widely available to the consumer. In 1902, color cinema film is invented. In 1935, Kodachrome color film is invented, but not popularized until the 1960s and 70s. Oop, there's the laser again. In the 1930s and 40s, rear projection starts to show up in film. And this is important for the virtual production stuff we're talking about later. But many of you have probably seen this where like the actors are cranking on the wheel and seemingly has nothing to do with where they're going on the road. It's pretty fun to watch. But like the height of technology at the time, right? In the 1940s, I don't have a slide for that. In the 1940s, blue screen was first developed, and it's used primarily for sci-fi films. And in 1950, Alan Turing publishes The Computer, Machinery, and Intelligence, which is where he predicts the existence of AI. And it's scary accurate, like could have been written yesterday. From the 1960s and 70s, Disney introduces another technology. It's a sodium vapor technology that allows for the removal of backgrounds. Mary Poppins is the kind of the penultimate use of this technology. But long story short on that, they charge a ton of money to use this, so no one outside of Disney really adopts it, and it kind of dies off. In the 1970s, green screen technology advances and is widely adopted through broadcast television news. And then in 1980, a lot of this talk goes back to Star Wars, so be ready for it. Richard Edlund creates, and the team at Industrial Light and Magic create modern blue screen process. It's kind of a crazy printing process for Empire Strikes Back. At one point, they have 36 different layers of film on one shot, and they won an Oscar for that in 1981, rightfully so. In 1990, a lot of you might or might not remember this, I don't know. Photoshop is released. That didn't change anything. Just kidding. Memes haven't been invented yet, but they're coming, and they started here. In 1993, Jurassic Park was released and blew my 7-year-old mind. It is the first time that CGI creatures ever appear on screen. In 1995, digital cameras become widely available to the public. This is also the same year that Toy Story, the first full CGI feature film, was released. We're skipping to 2007 because Y2K was a giant nothing burger. Adobe Lightroom was released in 2007. I was actually one of the people that beta tested it at University of Illinois in 2006. How many people here use Lightroom? A few people. Who might be a Capture One crowd. That's okay, so am I. In 2008, the first commercially marketed mirrorless camera was introduced, along with the first digital DSLR to shoot motion pictures. That's the Canon 5D Mark II. I own both of those. We're going to speed up really quick here, and we're getting to the end of this. So in 2015, Google releases this crazy nightmare generator called Deep Dream, and for some reason, everything has eyeballs. It was really not useful. It was made for competition, but it is kind of where the roots of a lot of generative AI start. Filmed in 2018 and released in 2019, The Mandalorian is the first blockbuster-scale use of virtual production, and it marks the beginning of a monumental shift in filmmaking. There are 3 stages in the world at this point, and in 2 years, there'll be over 350. It's wild. That's a wild amount of growth for this. 2019 was the first time I personally stepped on a virtual stage and immediately wanted to use it for advertising and film production and whatever creative, crazy ideas I could cook up. I was scheduled to fly out to LA to film a test in April of 2020. We all know what happened that year. In 2021, Daliah 1 was released. It is also a generative AI tool that creates images. In 2022, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, and ChatGPT are all released into the wild. In 2023, there are massive quality changes and iterations of these products, which brings us to today. Great. So what do we learn from this? Much like previous turn of the century, we're in an age of extremely accelerated innovation. There are a lot of questions to be answered about AI in regards to legality and authorship, and a lot of them were raised by the slideshow behind me. I mean, that was a pretty good image of the Mandalorian, and all I had to type in was Mandalorian and Grogu in a lush field. Like, it shouldn't be that easy, maybe. This is something we're going to dive deeper into in the panel discussion, because my voice is not the only one that should probably be heard here. Some AI tools are fantastic. I noticed from some of your entries on the survey that we sent out that a lot of people are using the Photoshop AI tools, and even the replace tool has killed a bunch of exit signs personally for me, which I'm grateful. That makes that a lot easier. I even wrote the press release for this event with ChatGPT. And then I had ChatGPT shorten it for social media. So, and there's also a number of culling and editing apps being added kind of every day. There's always a new one. And they're quite good. And if you're like me, less time in the editing chair is great. And if you're not like me and you like being in the editing chair, call me, I've got some work for you. Yes, AI will likely replace a lot of jobs, but it'll probably create some new opportunities as well. And that's what I want to focus on for the rest of this talk. So what is virtual production? You've probably heard me mention it a few times. And what if I told you behind me wasn't a screen? It's a window. Virtual production is a wide umbrella, but for our purposes this evening, it is the use of an LED volume, camera tracking, and 3D environments, and a game engine to create photorealistic, real-time, in-camera visual effects. Simply put, we use a lot of computers to redraw the 3D scene behind me in sync with the camera's movements to make the shot look real. Since we are actually in a virtual production studio, we can look at all the parts together. This large camera over here has, it's this one. Can you roll through that, please? Has a tracking system mounted on top of it. If you look up at the ceiling, you can see a constellation of stickers that it's looking at, and they're all arranged randomly so that it knows where it is in space. That relays the camera's position data to the servers in the room behind you to tell it where it is in space to the wall and shift the scene behind me. This is an illusion called parallax, the object shifting in space relative to the camera's movements in real time, as they would in the real world. If you think of like looking down a hallway and then taking a step to the right or left, you'll see more windows or less windows depending on what side you're on. And that wouldn't happen if this illusion was just 2D. So it makes it even more seamless, like you're standing in the real world. As long as each camera is tracked, this also allows you to create one-to-one film and still photography without ever leaving the studio to change your location. So that means you can take pictures and video as long as your camera is tracked, and the illusion will still hold. This is a great set of storytelling tools. There's a massive amount of computing power and expertise and hard-fought technical challenges in place to make this work and make it seem like magic. With not just weeks of preparation, to put this on this event, but years of investment, problem solving, and incredibly supportive, passionate community here in Chicago. I want to take this brief moment to thank Resolution Studios, Todd Freese, Scott Miller, Pete Walsh for making this all possible, and everyone else in the team in the back of the room. I think this is a time where I want to introduce Todd Freese. He's a technical. I'm going to screw up your title.
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good. It's all good.
He's going to share a little bit about the studio with you. He's the best guy to do it. I'm going to step over here.
All right. Welcome. What a great turnout. How are you guys doing tonight? So I'm going to there's a lot to cover. There will be plenty of time to reach out with questions. After this, I'm sure you're going to have lots of questions. We started sort of chasing this dream of virtual production about 10 years ago. The technology was nowhere near where it is now. We were the very first studio in the Midwest that had a fully working pipeline. And one of the things we quickly realized is that this technology is changing so fast. So for probably the last 4 years, I shut the main stage, this is one of our 4 stages, down for a week, and we do 3 days of just hardcore R&D. Every manufacturer and software company, they are always sending stuff to us to test. And then we do 2 days of client demos. The best way to learn about virtual production is to attend one of these demos and see it firsthand. And out of that, we basically produce a behind-the-scenes video. So I'm going to roll a video here that is from our last R&D week.
The back wall says 4,600 and the ceiling says 6,200. Still snowing outside. So checklist, I would love to see what the bolt motion information does.
Okay.
We're gonna fix some of the glare that we're causing.
Okay.
And then I wanna black out the back wall and on off the ceiling and see how much glare that's causing. And then look at the frustum at its widest, like you were saying, get it as high res as possible and make that the fixed size.
Perfect.
Okay. I mean, that should take what, 5 minutes?
It's a virtual production 5 minutes. Virtual production is just exploding in the industry in a way we've never seen before. So much is happening in such a short amount of time that you can't try really new techniques on actual jobs. So you need to be able to have an environment where you can do all kinds of testing.
It's a fast evolving space. And I think if you don't keep up with the technology as it's changing and use it and test it and learn it, you're inevitably gonna fall behind.
We're opening up the doors this week to producers, directors, creative directors, and we're testing a whole bunch of new technology. The centerpiece of that technology is an 80-foot wide, 14-foot high, planar, 1.9 millimeter wall.
They built this tile specifically for this use case of virtual production. The actual pixels are 1.9 millimeters apart. And so since all the tiles are half meter square, the smaller the number, the higher the resolution.
That means we can get closer to the wall. It means that you can have a greater depth of field before you start to see moire. And it means that you can really lean into the actual virtual environment even further than before because your latitude and creativity sort of opened up by the technology advancing to this point.
This wall is the highest resolution, largest wall in the Midwest. And we're testing this with a whole new configuration of Unreal servers and nodes.
Version 5 of Unreal is sort of a different beast than 4. So one of the things we're working through is getting version 5.1.1 to a point where it's stable enough that we feel comfortable using it.
Unreal 5 does offer a lot of benefits. The lighting's totally different, the textures and the way that it looks is totally different, but each new piece of technology fixes problems and makes it easier in some ways, but it also comes with its own learning curve. We've fixed a lot of problems, but let's see as this paces through from a glare perspective. This wall has a very high margin for dealing with glare, but you still have to control it. So one of the challenges on the first day is how do we fill this very large space with light and make it even and keep it off the wall at the same time over the course of a move that really covers quite a bit of ground. Right where your white line is right here, can you black, there you go, that's it. Working your way through that learning curve is an important step to staying proficient at the technology as it grows. Stand by, it's coming back.
We have been working on this with the goal of being able to offer this as a viable production alternative. We've turned that corner. Now we have one of the highest resolution screens, and we're projecting some of the most realistic environments.
When we did our first demonstration of virtual production, which was 2.5 years ago, the wall was a similar size, and it wasn't even 4K. Now we have a wall this size, and it's almost 13K. It's a pretty remarkable change. And that really has freed up the ability for the camera to see it in more natural ways.
For so many years, I sat around looking at this and trying to figure out where I was going to move my camera. And now we can create environments to shoot stories and engage audiences and to stir emotions in people, and we can do it all from a studio. That's amazing to me.
So before I turn this over back to Ross, just to give you some sense of perspective, on a typical 10-hour virtual production shoot day, we average between 3 and 6 virtual locations. For us to be in another part of the world takes us a couple minutes to just load another file. The most we've ever done is 9. A lot of that depends on how much film coverage you need from that particular volume. And so it's really, we say this is another tool that every filmmaker needs to be looking at. The term virtual production covers a very wide gamut and a huge diversity in costs. Sort of starting out in the beginning is basically plates. Car driving shots are the low-hanging fruit of virtual production. And for a lot of that, we can either shoot plates or license plates, all the way up to a fully 3D tracked environment. We'll talk kind of more here as we progress on. There'll be plenty of time for questions and answers, and I'll turn it back over to Ross.
Cool, thank you. This is the part that I'm actually more comfortable talking about, so hold on to your seats. Oh, I'll never get comfortable with this remote, though. Many of you probably saw this when you walked in. This is a fully 3D environment. It's a video of it right now, just for our presentation purposes. We'll go back to talk about this thing. So I built this myself with a strategy called kit bashing. I didn't 3D model anything. There's a lot of things available online that you can kind of put together and then optimize for this scene as well. It's a whole skill set in itself. But this kind of shows off all of the kind of great and interesting bells and whistles of virtual production. You have kind of animations in the trees and the grass and things like that add to the realism. And then you have these birds, which are like my favorite new thing that some friends at another studio showed me. Thanks, Andy and Kevin, if you're out there. They kind of have their own little behaviors, and they fly around. They add another layer of realism to this thing as well. And then there's fog and obviously these 2 robots. Now these robots are interesting because they're not 3D models. They're actually images generated with Midjourney and then dropped into the scene using things you don't really care about. But they're fun, and it's a creative way to kind of use this technology in a different way. And with anything, the more specific you get, the more expensive it is, either cost, time, or expertise. So it kind of gets us to a really interesting place because they're further away, and we can create really interesting effect. One of the advantages of virtual production is this thing called pre-visualization. This is all shots from inside Unreal Engine. Environments are built ahead of the shoot, and that puts a lot of the traditional VFX pipeline in the beginning of the production process. So you can get alignment with all of your stakeholders and talk to people ahead of time. You can see all these things. This is for a car shoot, and they just want to see a bunch of different environments. So I was able to bring a model in, bring a person in, and kind of show them what that would look like on the screen. They'd never done virtual production before. So this is a simple mock-up for the client. And what this allows you to do is actually see what you're going to get. So it's a very WYSIWYG process. The sets are reusable and can be redressed. So if you want to change something, he talked about doing 9 shots or different environments a day. You can actually change things in and out. You do have to redress the actual physical set around you. That usually takes more time than switching over a digital scene. So sets are reusable. With the strategy, this means more content and less time if you apply the right strategy to it. Think of these sets as or environments is the actual term, as flats on a stage, but rotatable, scalable, and depending how they're constructed, you can edit things and move them around. changing locations and talent to sell the same product to different markets, or as like a function of storytelling, which we'll get into it in a moment, are a huge advantage sometimes over traditional production, depending on the project. And, oh, I already did that. Here's a case study that I'm going to show you. I had a client approach me in December. This is a true story. And they asked me if virtual production would be a viable alternative to them flying down to Miami to shoot a kind of a lifestyle scene for a specific product. And I said, yeah, that would work. And they said, we're going to go to Miami because it's cold. And I was like, I don't blame you. But I thought about it after the fact, and I said, well, what would make this more, practical for that, or beat out Miami? Like, how could I have won that work, right? And the answer was I built this, which is almost exactly what they asked for. It looks like their photo references. And I did this in a few hours. So I'm not trying to belittle how much time and skill it takes. I've been working at this about 6-7 years. So it's hard to do this, but I did it pretty quickly. And skill it takes. I've been working at this about 6-7 years. So it's hard to do this, but I did it pretty quickly. And this is still just a replacement for they still would have flown to Miami with this. But I built another scene, and I propped it in a certain way that reflected the actual product. I can't tell you what that is, but does anyone remember that AT&T campaign from a few years ago? More bars, more places? No one? Just me? There we go. Audience participation. I got one over there. There's your bars, more places. And these can be animated. You can do that sort of thing. But this is an example of something you couldn't do with just flying somewhere. You could do it with VFX, certainly, but you can't capture it in camera. So this is maybe an advantage or a good use case of how you can use virtual production to enhance your storytelling. Last year, I basically did a tour of all the airports in the country, which was fun and weird and also great. This is the new terminal at O'Hare. And with this client, we did this project in mind of potentially using virtual production in the future, using this asset library that we were creating for them. So we captured 2D images and video in every location. And we've been experimenting with a few different ways of repurposing these assets. Some with 2D playback, which I'll show you. We have a video of a violinist that we shot as a test here at Resolution. Slide, so we don't keep hearing her, but great violinist. But I got to talk to. So that is a pretty compelling illusion, even with just 2D playback. But we've also been experimenting with something called a 2.5D workflow. There's people that have done it certainly better, but where we cut up some of the images that we created, project them into 3D space, and then those little spheres are supposed to be the company's logo, but I couldn't put it up for this thing. So, but you can kind of see how things look like they might be moving through space depending on your camera movement. This is much more limited than some of the full 3D workflows we've talked about earlier today, but it's still pretty cool. I think I'm standing in front of it, but great. We're back at the robots. We're almost done, sorry. So what are some opportunities here for you guys sitting here as creatives in virtual production? In addition to being a photographer and director, there's tons of opportunities for humans with strong visual sensibilities and a passion for storytelling. You saw those scenes. It takes a certain level of artistry and an eye for lighting and space and propping and art direction that are certainly things that you as photographers, directors, other creatives, or just people of the world have within your quiver. So if you're interested in it, I would encourage you to maybe pursue learning a little bit more about it. Many traditional roles in production have their counterparts or an augmentation, let's say, to their current roles. So art department and virtual art department become an extension of each other or one and the same. In recent weeks, I've actually even seen a crop of AI tools for generating environments come on the market, generating environments for this come on the market. So even virtual production, this relatively new method of working that many of you have probably not even heard about before this talk came up or just learned about it, are also being touched by AI. So in the broader context of history, the speed of change sometimes is incredibly fast and dizzying. And I personally know how easy it is to doom spiral about AI. I'm like, oh my God, it's coming for everything. But if you rest in your sensibilities as an artist or whatever it is that you do, and you seek out the tools that help you make and build and create the things that are important to you, I think we're going to find a way to be okay. Sure, it might doom us all, but it could also yield some pretty magical things. And the robots are coming. It's kind of up to you if they're friend or foe. Cool. I want to take a brief moment to also thank Camera Ambassador. They provided all the cameras for this event. Claire Britt and the ASMP for their support and help putting this together. And Miller Creative, Resolution Studios. So we talked about them earlier, but I cannot do this without them, and no one really should. It's a little complicated. And then last but not least, I want to thank you all for your curiosity and interest. I hope you enjoyed this portion of our presentation. We're going to take a brief break so I can kind of catch my breath, and then we'll get our panelists kind of lined up so we can field your questions and make this night even more interesting. Thanks. All right, part two. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Take your seats, give people a few minutes. I gotta make sure I'm queued up here. All right, so we have a great group of panelists for you this evening. I'm gonna start with the people in the room and then the awesome people above us next. So right next to me, you already met Todd Freese. And this is Daliah Saper. She's an IP attorney, majoring in a lot of business and creative law. That's probably adequate but not great description. We can talk about it later. And then we've got Beth Huerta, who is a rep for Cannon Associates. She is also an AI artist. And then we have in the middle, Kristyna Archer. She's a photographer and director. She is from Chicago but lives in LA currently, and does a lot of work with virtual production and uses AI commonly in her practice to kind of empower her workflows, both creatively and for kind of the business side of things as well. And then last but not least, we have Lawrence Jones from the Frame Store. Lawrence does many things. He is a virtual production supervisor for the Frame Store. He's also a director and a real cool guy. So we're glad to have everyone here and excited to get into some questions that I'm sure you're all eager to ask. So we're going to start probably in the room. I'm going to ask each one of you to talk about, a little bit what you do and if you use AI, if you use virtual production at all. Some people are going to be in different camps for this, but that's why we have a diverse group of panelists. Let's start with Daliah, since you're looking at me like you don't want to.
I'm just taking it all in. This is one of the coolest places I've given a talk to, and just have the environment that I'm sitting in. Yes, I am an IP lawyer, entertainment lawyer, social media lawyer, whatever you want to whatever you want to call it. But the focus of our firm is primarily all things creative. And that necessarily means that sometimes we're on the cusp of this new technology and new legal issues that arise because of the new technology. I started my firm 19 years ago, and right around the time when the social networks were a thing and social media was this new big thing, and the legal implications of social media was what everyone was talking about. And then I was there through the wave of BitTorrent lawsuits where pornography studios were seeding torrents and then suing people who were sharing files. Then Redigi was an interesting case. I mean, I can go through it, but now we've got AI, and the questions I'm getting are, all right, well, we know what copyright law is, and I think we talked about, I can provide a little overview just as creatives. It never hurts to remember what the basic tenets of copyright law are, and then address them and explain to clients, all right, well, we have these incredible tools, and they allow us to create incredible things, and many of you are creating them for others, and you want to know, well, what is the legal landscape and the legal liability as it pertains to me using these tools? So is this just like a Photoshop situation where it's a tool that I still my output and I can safely sign that indemnification provision? Or do I not touch AI until the myriad of lawsuits that are currently pending have a really, have some resolution?
Great. We'll get into that a little bit. I think that's it's hot on everyone's minds right now. Todd, we already kind of talked a little bit about what you do here, but I think specifically to you, I'd love to hear just kind of your role here in this building. Maybe who should talk to you, really, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I wear a lot of hats as a CTO and as a virtual production supervisor, one of many that we have here, including with our partners. You know, I always kind of describe myself in the context of virtual production as that sort of liaison between the creative team, you know, DP, directors, the people on the shoot, and the technical team, the people in the back room running the servers and camera tracking and things like that. You know, the reality is we speak different languages, right? One of the things we learned early on is that Unreal people are not used to a lot of the terminology. You know, I would say in the film business we have our own language, as a lot of industries do. And so part of my role starts early in pre-production, in that in terms of there's huge differences between different studios in terms of do a lot of explaining about differences between LED and LED layout and things like that, is to, you know, make sure that in pre-production things are going along the lines that we're never exceeding something that's not technically possible. And then on the shoot is to make sure that, you know, if we need to make a change, as you know, shoots, we're always changing things, to make sure that we're changing it in the direction that's going to give us, you know, the best output. So a lot of it is internal, just making sure that we have the right gear, researching new gear, but a lot of it is that hand-holding. I'd say even now, about 80 to 90% of the people using this technology, either the director or the DP, it's their first time or they're very new to it. So they have just enormous amount of questions. And you know, so our role is to make sure that they feel comfortable.
Yeah, I think I play a lot of that role too. As someone that's actually used it, you know, you still have to walk clients through and help them understand, oh, you can't really do certain things, you know.
Right.
But you can do a lot of.
Well, the first question you ask is, should we be doing it?
Yeah.
Right. There's certain shots. Should we be doing virtual? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no. And then the term virtual production is a pretty wide overused term because it covers anywhere from just a still image or plates back there all the way to a 3D tracked environment. And you know, you may have multiple cameras, and you know, from a cost standpoint, that's a massive range. And so, you know, the first question is, you know, we always say use the right tool for the job. Just like on a typical job, we don't always use the same camera. We may have a couple shots that are high speed, and we have a Phantom, we may have a camera as an LF or a Super 35, we may have a B camera that's a Red. It's all good, they're all just tools, and we just want to make sure that people are using the tools correctly.
That's fantastic. We'll kick it up to Beth back there. Beth, you've got kind of two branches to what you do, so I'd love to hear you address both, and in your own words, when you're ready.
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. I'm hoping you can all hear me right now. I won't worry about that. Yeah, okay, great. I'm Beth Huerta. I am an agent for Candace Gelman and Associates, a senior agent. I represent advertising and editorial photographers and assist them with every facet of their careers. I'm also the in-house editor at CG&A. I'm an adjunct instructor at Drexel University in the photography program. And I also use AI to create my own artwork that I have sold prints of and have been in art shows with. So, yeah, I definitely am on different sides of the fence in their entirety, whether it's in the fact that I'm here to support and protect my own artists and address their concerns about AI while also using the tool myself for my own artwork. So it's definitely a dichotomy, and it's controversial, and it's been interesting as it evolves. It's been really interesting. Thank you.
Sure. Hey, Kristyna, tell me a little bit what you do in your own words.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm sure there's a lot of familiar faces in the crowd that I wish I could be there in person, but thank you so much for having me. I'm a director photographer. I do a lot of stylized studio work and have been working in virtual production. Like you can see behind me is one of the film stills from a commercial I directed for Green Mountain Energy as a virtual production, and have been exploring and diving fully into it ever since. And kind of the crossroads of where virtual production is meeting AI has been really fascinating as well. And I've been exploring AI in my short films and also in my processes in pitching and storyboarding and writing. So I've really kind of completely immersed myself from both sides, because for me, creating in virtual production is taking my work to another level, because I've been in the studio for so long. Now I can create these hybrid worlds that, are completely like opening up Pandora's box for me. So it's been really exciting, and it's constantly innovating, and, just keeping tabs on all of the latest news and everything that's changing is really exciting. So, yeah.
And Lawrence, you're such a multifaceted guy. It's probably best left in your hands to explain what you do. And I promise you're not always going to be last in this thing.
Sure. I'm seeing the pattern now, man. Yeah, I'm Lawrence Jones. Thanks for having me, guys. I am a creative director and real-time visual effects supervisor for Framestore. For those of you who don't know Framestore, we're very large, multi-thousand person visual effects company focused on film, advertising, episodics, and immersive. So my career, I've spent a lot of time in the creative technology world, where I've been a creative, but always loved the idea of bringing in new technology and doing something unique that no one's ever done. So, years ago, probably 12 years ago, I got into virtual production before it was called that, where I'd work in the broadcast world and do live visual effects on football fields for ESPN, and using most of the same tools that we're using now in what we call virtual production, the LED version of it, right? So when Todd talks about camera telemetry and all those in Unreal Engine and real-time rendering and Genlock, and I'm very familiar with all that. I've been dealing with that for years. So we're at a really great place now, because I don't have to really explain what I do as long as I say it's virtual production and it's Mandalorian, they're like, all right, great, I get what you're doing. So it's helped me a lot. I'm like airplanes talking to people. But yeah, so I definitely use AI every single day as a creative, as helping me sort of come up with and communicating visually to clients what I want to do. It's helped tremendously. And also using it and delving into it for the visual effects side of it all, which is very controversial even for someone in visual effects, right? Because everybody's afraid about losing their job, but there are different ways to utilize AI. So hopefully we'll get into that later. But yeah, so can't wait to talk more.
That's great. I just lost my spot on what we're doing here. But so it sounds like almost all of you are using AI. I know, Daliah, you use ChatGPT a little bit. And
yeah, I think we had a conversation earlier today about the risks and the benefits of using AI, and I said, there's all this fear that AI is replacing creatives' positions or just jobs in general, and it might. I think the robots are coming, but it's also, there's so many fields that require a skill set to decide or ascertain if the output's actually usable. I think we get a lot of B+ work now. The example I gave in my office is we use it all the time to make the statements better, or to kind of double check the provisions that we have in the contract, kind of like, remind me, did I capture everything I need to have in this negotiation? Or go write a quick cease and desist letter and make sure you hit everything. And I had one of my law clerks, just as a test, kind of write something up. And I said, no, this isn't good. Go put it in some sort of ChatGPT. And it came back with like, greetings of the day. We wish you good health. And I'm like, my exact words were, we're not Nigerian scammers. This is an unacceptable opening statement. But I think if you use it wisely, I just consider it to be, any other tool, Photoshop times 1,000. Or a Google machine times 1,000, because what it's doing is truly aggregating information for you and presenting it to you. So the speed with which it does it is unprecedented, it's unbelievable, but you still need someone who understands that field, whether it's law or accounting or whatever, to then take that output and intelligently use it.
Yeah, and especially in the context of image creation, there are a lot of different tools out of there. From Stable Diffusion, there's a ton of them out there. They all have differences in terms of where the imagery, where it was trained on, and every day there's yet another service coming out with their AI technology, and I think from a legal standpoint, a lot of that has to do with you're starting to see ones where all of it was trained on images that they had the rights on, and so that kind of gets back into something that you really have to know where was it trained, right? Yeah, was it scoured off the internet?
Even that is like morally dubious, I think, a little bit. If not, I mean, it might be legal. To be determined probably, but people that submitted stock to certain sites, not to be named,
And then there's also
protect me from defamation, Daliah, please.
And also, is it defendable in court, right? Because regardless if you made sure that you're using a service that was trained on images that they had the rights, doesn't mean that they can't still sue you, right? And it has to be defended.
But also, what does trained really mean, right? We know what it means in the context of these suits, but if I really like this bottle of water and I see it at the shelf and it inspires me to create a painting that maybe incorporates this bottle of water, was I trained on it? Is that output a derivative of this bottle of water? I mean, if I'm the artist that created the bottle of water, I could argue that my output's a derivative. And then traditional copyright law would apply in the analysis. So is the output, I keep using output, but if the thing that I get from AI is substantially similar to the thing that it trained on or it copied, well then that's a far better copyright infringement suit than AI went to the grocery store, looked at lots of food and decided, okay, grocery stores usually have apples and bananas, and I'm gonna give you a picture that encompasses apples and bananas. And so this concept of fair use comes in, which a lot of creatives think is this kind of blanket black and white defense to copyright infringement, and just the lawyer, that's why I'm here, is to remind you that fair use is this mushy concept that is not going to be the same every time you get sued. So the courts will consider various factors, and one of those would be, is this output something that changes the nature of the underlying work? What is the purpose of it? How much of it did you use? Did you do it for commercial purpose? And so on. So, I mean, I can keep talking about copyright law.
I mean, it's great. And I'll say we'll also open this up to questions in the crowd a little bit later. But we want to talk a little bit about how people in this group are actually using AI. Lawrence, I promised.
Look at you.
What are I mean, I think a lot of us are, at least in this group from what we gathered, we're not really using it as the final output, but we use it to kind of aid in our output. Lawrence, can you talk a little bit about how you're using it in your practice and your workflow and what you do?
So on the daily for treatments, et cetera, I'm constantly sort of having Midjourney run in the background, because it's not only the happy accents are also informing me of certain things and having my mind go in different places. It's almost like you have your best friend there that doesn't want to eat anything or drink anything or argue with you and just is your muse and helps you, right? So, so it sounds scary, and I probably will have a weird relationship with Midjourney eventually, but it is that. But so in the real world, we worked on a Lexus commercial, it just aired in January, like the 3rd. But it involved a robot, like a digital robot. And so I worked with the director, Rich Lee. And so typically, we'd have concept artists and sketchers, and we would try to crank out as much sort of inspiration. I would find as much reference. But so what I use Midjourney for is really just a reference generator, not different than going to Google and finding references, but more catered to what I want, right? And simultaneously, I have concept artists working, but the amount of work and ideas that can be turned around so fast with Midjourney is insane. So I now look at all the outcome and I go, I like that. I like the hydraulic leg idea. I really think that's really cool. Or, oh, wait, that's stirring another idea that I'm going to search for. So, and in the end, I have so much more to show to a director to get them to really tell me what they want, because now they see. And so now we finely tune what the director likes. Then I bring in the concept artist to actually do it for real, because then we can own it, right? So then after that point, we actually build it in 3D, et cetera, et cetera. So I really think it's a great workflow, and I think other creative directors are doing that as well, my peers, et cetera. So that's what I use AI for a ton. ChatGPT, I'll go in just to sort of correct bad grammar type thing, and then I'll piece through what I like about that. So those are really the two. And then now I'm also we'll have a treat that's due in some crazy 2-day period. So, and we have no budget to actually create design. So now I'll take those Midjourney images, I'll go into Photoshop, comp them in ways that are more catered to what I want, because you really can't art direct AI, and that's the biggest issue right now. So then I'll take it and I'll throw it into Runway. And for those of you not familiar with Runway, it does video motion really well. Like Pika Labs is another alternative. So now instead of just stills, I can show sort of animated GIFs that really tell the story of what I want to tell, and sell. So that's pretty much what I've been doing so far.
Yeah, I use it very similar in a lot of storyboards and things like that with it. I run into, even running into putting together the slides for this thing, there's a slide on rear projection, right? I could not get AI to have the camera look into the windshield of the car. I tried so many different combinations of prompts. I'm like, I'm moving on. I could not get it to look at the eyes or faces of the people. And I was like, look at the eyes or the faces of the people through the windshield of the car with the rear projection thing behind them. And it just wouldn't do it, So I think there are limitations still. They keep getting better, but there's weird things where even if you wanted to create entirely an AI at this point, even if you could use the output, you just can't get it to do certain things, which is funny and frustrating.
And they're changing. There's something called oh my god, I forgot, Dragan, I think it's called. So there are interesting tools that are coming out on a daily, from white papers and all over the world, where it's all sort of disparate little fragments of functionality that in 6 months will all be located in one place as a tool set, where you can actually control things a lot better. You can create 3D objects, you can literally type a script and see the video played out. I've never seen development in creative technology happen so fast, ever.
Yeah. Kristyna, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing? I know you're doing some.
Yeah, sure. In regards to virtual production, or more so with AI, or all of the above?
I think all of the above, because some of your treatments and stuff you're helping yourself write with AI. Is that correct, or?
Yeah, I guess I would start with maybe the fact that I think, the race to everyone adding AI onto all of your businesses, just to feel like everything's innovative. So I think what's important for artists or directors, filmmakers, photographers is just that I see it as another tool to expand my aesthetic. And I'm not trying to chase a trend, and I'm not all of a sudden going to be an animation director. Just think I saw live action directors all of a sudden become animation directors because it's really cool. And there's no harm in experimenting, but I'm trying to be very calculated and curated so that it, is cohesive with the style I've already established. And so that's kind of the angle that I'm coming at it with. But I've been, studying and experimenting with all the tools. And I think how it's benefited me the most is in my processes leading up to the final output and solving problems on passion projects where likely, I don't have to go through this client and copyright issue that I know a lot of people aren't able to use AI in campaigns with, which obviously we can get into. But I had to solve some problems and I didn't have the budget to, be able to hire a VFX artist. So I did create completely AI fabricated environments with piecing kind of elements together through Runway. Mainly was the program I was using. But I have found some success after 30 plus hours, hoping to reduce that time frame. But on my pitches, just started playing with the storyboard component and, would really love to be able to have camera movement and get really nitty gritty about all of those terms in terms of the language that they're being trained on, because that would be, game changer. And I'm sure it's headed that way. But I have been expediting my pitch process, which is such a huge part of, we're creating treatments, weekly, and it's a lot is involved in creating those. So yeah, I've been also creating renderings to base something on for the set design that I'm doing. And so mainly process driven for my pitches and exploring ideas, and then lightly in my work thus far with AI. I guess it was centered around AI.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds like everyone in this group is on some level embracing AI. Yeah, I mean, Beth, you're an artist, so like you're kind of all in. I think what I'm kind of interested in hearing about, and then we can move into some of the copyright issues, and then I'd like to turn it over to the audience because we're having a great conversation, but we've got a limited amount of time here. Mm-hmm. Beth, on your client side for your artists and things, are there any concerns that they're dealing with? Are they diving into it? What's the story there? Can you talk about that? I'm sorry, if you can't, we can cut that out later.
No, yeah, absolutely. It's just becoming a thing. It's been slow to get to us. And I don't feel that that's in any way because CG&A as an agency is insulated. I feel like we're very much a part of what's happening, in real time. And we've only had one circumstance yet where we lost a job. A photographer that I represent lost a job to AI, essentially. The client decided to go with an AI rendition of the content or image. It was an image that they were intending to create. So, that's happened once, and since this sort of has become more and more of a thing, copyright issues are very real, and they're definitely, I think, putting a hamper on the amount of time it's taking for this to come to our doorstep as agents representing real human being photographers and directors. That's what we're dealing with, and we're carefully following, what's going on with the lawsuits that are weighing on copyright as an issue with AI. And I believe that it's all going to get sorted out. And once it does, then we're definitely going to get knocks on the door. It's going to be happening. Internally, I've been using AI to assist myself with assisting the photographers write treatments. So I use Midjourney to create visuals from time to time to add to treatments for clients, sort of fill the gap. If the photographer doesn't have an image that speaks to the creative that the agency is hoping to make, then I can come up with something that's loosely representative of that and use it in a treatment. On behalf of the photographer, we discuss, right, in advance how the photographer will be able to describe where this came from, how it's connected to his or her point of view. So certainly there, been using Midjourney, but outside of that, no, we haven't done much in the way of using virtual production yet. We're still unsure, just terribly unsure about how to accept and envelop ourselves in this new technology. So it's it's been my mission to find out as much as I can. I'm just that kind of person. Even in my own artwork, I started trying to find out everything I could about Midjourney so that I could explain it to my students in the photography program. And I got hooked, and I started using it to make my own work. And I was unafraid. I picked it up. I learned how to dance with the enemy. So I felt like that was really important. Yeah.
Yeah, I think tying it back into virtual production, I touched a little bit in my presentation about pre-visualization, and I think desire and need that's kind of always been there is to find alignment with your clients and like get on the same page. And pre-visualization is there. If you talk for like a Moire VFX workflow, there's something called a white box model. I'm probably butchering that, Lawrence, so you can tell me why I'm wrong. But where you mock up a scene essentially, kind of like the Miami thing, but like less sophisticated, no textures and things, to even just block out a scene or even like kind of understand how you're going to film something. And like with tools that are being developed, even the tools that exist already, that's always important. Like that's something that doesn't change. So even like doing storyboards with AI, like you're just finding alignment faster, and like so you can actually do the real work, which I think is empowering. At the same time, a little bit scary too. But we should talk about copyright, I think, a little bit. And
I guess what is the question around AI when it comes from the legal angle? And I think I touched on it a little bit. The majority of these cases are based on copyright infringement, which is the unauthorized reproduction, distribution, the performance, or the creation of a derivative work based on the original. And so each case, some are by authors, some are from coders, others are from photography collectives. In almost every case, they're saying, hey, you, for whatever reason, had access to our work, you didn't get permission, and the end result is that you are creating output that is derivative, if not exactly the same, as the underlying work that belongs to us. And hey, imagine if this robot didn't exist and you wanted to create a montage of 20 different, fall scenes from around the country. You would have to literally get a licensing person who would go scour the internet or archives and then call me and say, all right, I found this archive of this library and I saw Fox and CNN had this footage. Here's 100 different shots, and can we use them? Can you give, and I still do this. I need a fair use analysis because we're making a documentary and we want to use 20 different scenes, and we went out and found them. And then I'll say, all right, this one was probably fair use, this one you got to get money for and you got to license it. But now the robot's kind of eliminating that and just going and grabbing it, and then the questions that are being presented in these cases are they actually grabbing it, or are they training, and then what does training really mean?
Right.
But some of these cases are stronger than others for the reasons that I just mentioned, namely that the output is not some new content. It is, in the case of example Getty images, you see the output involves the Getty logo, and it's been distorted to the point where they're not only asserting copyright claims, they're saying you're diluting the value of our brand, because the output has this mushy Getty images logo, and if you look closely, actually, for fun, you should pull the Getty Images lawsuit, and you'll see that it's like a picture of a soccer player, but his eye is like where his mouth should be. And then
a Daliah.
And then in the corner, there's this like Getty Images logo. And they're like, well, this makes it look like we have, this makes it look like we have really bad, not high quality images. You're devaluing Getty's good name. And as I also mentioned in the beginning, it's the kind of the balance of risk. You are probably a freelancer unless you work for Framestore. You're not going to want to assume the liability that might come from developing or creating something using AI, because actually, practically, the client's going to be the one that's going to get sued because they're the ones actually using it.
Right.
And copyright law isn't based on really sort of intent. I mean, it's just kind of one of those strict liability things, meaning it's not like you did it on purpose. You could go online, find an image that you thought was publicly accessible because you could right-click and save it, and still get sued. And essentially the person who's using it is the first person to get sued, but it goes down the chain. Most of the contracts you sign say that, hey, I'm hiring you, you're representing and warranting that the creation that you're giving me is unique or original, or that you have the license to use it. And by the way, if we get sued because of what you did, you're gonna pay our legal fees. Right. And so this week, Chris is from my office, you can say hi. Literally one of our assignments is a software developer that says our clients is asking us to use open source and AI generated code, and there's an indemnification clause. So can you write into our standard master services agreement a section that says, all right, we're gonna do it, you're gonna approve it, and because you approved it, it's not our fault if you get sued, and we're not gonna indemnify you.
Yeah, it's wild.
Daliah, I have a question, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with like Gaussian splatting. And on Ross, you probably are, right?
I know what Gaussian splatting is.
Okay.
Do you want to explain?
It's this idea that you have a photo, and now because of AI, you can actually extrapolate and create a complete 3D scene out of that, right? So if I go and this isn't more of I grab a photo online. If I go into Ross's home when he's not looking and I take a picture of his living room, and then I create this three-dimensional world out of that, and I slap it in Todd's virtual production technology, right, stage, and I shoot with that background, is there a lawsuit there because I didn't get permission from Ross?
Yeah, that's, again, forget the fancy technology. Did you go into Ross's house without permission? Well, perhaps.
Nope. He went to the bathroom and we wasn't looking at.
It's a pretty nice house, guys. Come on. It's all right.
I mean, look, it's a location agreement.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the thing is, this stuff, the copyright cases aren't really that complicated. Did you copy it? Is this substantially similar to that? And did you have access? That's kind of the crux of every copyright lawsuit. In your example is, I had authority to take a single photo. Was I authorized to then create this bigger photo? The simple answer is, if you're allowed to be there and you took the photo, then this virtual reality or I don't want to say the virtual production version of it is your derivative. So there would be no copyright issue. You own that. The only claims that Ross could bring would be rooted in some sort of trespass or invasion of privacy if he had some things laying out on the table and didn't want the world to see blown up on this stage.
I mean, come on
Ross,
over, Lawrence.
when am I getting the invite, man?
Just let me clean up first, okay? I mean, Gaussian splats are pretty cool. They're not editable, right? That's the other problem. But there's another process called photogrammetry for you photographers out there where you can take pictures. You can actually do it with your phone. You can take pictures of an object in the round, essentially, and then some computer science will put them together and make a 3D model. So one of the things I was doing, it's not quite ready yet, so I didn't show it, but I traveled out west to a location called the Alabama Hills, which is beautiful. And I scanned a bunch of rocks, and I'm building a scene to have a one-to-one kind of digital model of the Alabama Hills. There's actually it's very like an Instagrammable, they call it Instagram corner. But I think it's beautiful, but I also think it's funny to be able to put anyone I want into Instagram corner. So that's something to look into if you're curious about this stuff. It's kind of a new way of.
Well, the interesting thing about AI is that the AI outputs are not considered copyrightable. And I think if you saw it, right, so if I direct the machine, give me a pic, if I prompt it, I want a photo of a lawyer sitting at a desk wearing a red suit. Who owns the image? Who owns the copyright to the image? Who thinks I do, because I told it to make me that?
Does anyone think that? No? Oh, there's one guy right there.
Chris, what do you think?
I think that there's room for copyrightability within AI generation.
He said he thinks for people who couldn't hear him, he thinks that there's room for copyrightability in AI generation.
Right, but the Copyright Office's default is that it's no different than hiring an agency. I might have a vision for what I want the commercial to be or what the set to look like. But that's why I need a work for hire agreement, right? Because the creative I've hired is going to be the one that's creating it, and I need to own the copyright, and I do it with this document that says the work is going to be mine. And so here, instead of a human, I'm using this machine to make me the image, to draw for me. And the Copyright Office has already said, you didn't draw the image. And so the robot, the data set, the computer gave you that image. So the human authorship here is low. And we don't think you deserve a copyright in this output, which is also scary if the client's hiring you and they want to own the output.
Right.
And some of that's the same analysis as when we counsel on open source code, kind of like make sure the client knows that it might not be theirs completely. But it's mushy. It's a mushy, we have one example of that led a woman using Midjourney to create a comic book, and the court said, the Copyright Office said, you don't get to own that. Yes?
Do you think copyright goes to the owner of the machine then?
No. It's like, I talk about the monkey selfie case.
I love the monkey selfie case.
So
This is my favorite
Are you
thing.
familiar with the monkey selfie case? Some of you are nodding. I wish we could show the monkey selfie on the screen, but essentially the short version of the lawsuit is that a photographer goes into the jungles and he thinks it'd be really cool to set up some of these cameras where these macaw monkeys, I don't know how to say them, can go in there and they're interested in the cameras and start taking selfies by basically clicking on it. These gorgeous images of monkeys smiling at themselves are created, and he
I don't know if
goes,
you guys can see it.
oh, there you go.
This is the monkey selfie. It's really, you should Google it later because it's charming.
He goes to, essentially license these images and protect these images, and the people for the ethical treatment of animals and others say, wait a second, you didn't press the shutter, and that's how copyright law works. The person who, for the most part, makes it happen, even though they try and keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah.
The person who presses the shutter owns it. Here, even though he arranged it, they said the monkey's the one who actually took the picture. The monkey's not a human. We don't give copyrights to not humans. And so, by the way, these are going to be fair use. That means they're not even fair use, sorry. These are public domain images.
Right.
You're welcome to use the monkey selfie as much as you like. And it went up the courts and ultimately settled. Yes, lots of hands.
In that example, I'd say the copyright, though, went to the owner of the machine, the owner of the camera that
Who's talking?
took the picture. So that was just,
No, the copyright owner is not the owner of the device. That is not correct. So let's say I'm sitting here and we're all doing this wonderful presentation. First of all, none of that's protectable unless it's recorded. And if you have your camera and you record us speaking, you own us speaking, even though we're doing the work. Now, what if you handed your phone to your friend to take the picture? He had a better angle or whatever. No longer matters that it's your phone. He owns it because he pressed the button. Yes.
That's wild, yeah. So, that's the crux of all those, why people can't own the copyright. So the companies are kind of shying away from it right now. That's continuing to evolve, right? But
the bigger the company, the less likely they are to really use AI. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe that's my experience. The ones that are using it are the smaller freelancers, the smaller projects. Use it for your marketing, your Instagram posts, low stakes stuff.
yeah, I've seen, I saw a weird campaign, I'm not gonna say who it was, but it was a beverage company, and you could AI generate your own Christmas cards, which was kind of weird, not personal. I don't know, but that was one of the cases.
Fake family, or you just look like really like a good-looking family?
It was I think it was a branded data set, right? So it was like a picture regarding their product, but yeah, it was weird. I didn't do it. I just screen grabbed it. And then the other one was kind of low-hanging fruit. It's kind of another product that's seems like a pyramid scheme, maybe. So they wouldn't care about having original artwork, and they just put it up there. It's people drinking champagne. Clearly AI generated, so. But that's all I've seen. I haven't seen anyone else use it. And even those cases are kind of weird. Anyway. Yeah, over the corner. Two-part question. He's coming over with the microphone right now.
I've got a two-part question. The first one, can you explain more what it means to create a 3D environment? And then the second part is, please explain the benefits and negatives to using a still image versus a 3D image in production?
Hey, Lawrence, do you want to take the 3D environment part of that, kind of what the workflow is for that? I think that might be specifically tailored to you.
Yeah, sure. Specifically, is that with AI or just in general, like a traditional VFX approach?
We all know what 3D is based on height, width, and depth from grade school, but once we enter into a virtual realm, what are some of the limitations and capabilities of that, and how is that even made possible?
Well, I guess to sort of blanket the process. When we can create 3D worlds sort of in two buckets. One is based off of real world data, and the other is based off of just building it procedurally, right? So you have your CG program in Maya, you have an artist, a modeler, and they start building, they'll start building, say, a living room, and they'll build it based off reference photos or by memory or just by pure measurements. And at the end of the day, you have your mesh, which is what it's the shape and the like you're saying, the width, the height, and the depth of the objects. And then you have to position those objects, and then you actually have to start telling the computer what you want the texturing to be. What's the surfacing, and how is light reflecting off it or not reflecting off and behaving? And so there's one bucket where you're creating from scratch. The other is like as Ross is talking about, like photogrammetry is a way where you're actually acquiring that data from the real world. So if you get like an app called Polycam and you use it, it'll create a whole bunch of images, and it'll use those images and it'll triangulate all the common features of each of those images. So if 3 pictures have the same spot on the wall, it will figure out where that is in the 3D world and then eventually create a mesh of its own, and it'll use the texture from the photos of those images. And so then it creates a real nasty sort of, it's like bad code. It's like a nasty sort of data set that then an artist has to clean and make proper. And that's totally oversimplifying it, but does that answer some of your question, or am I on the right path?
Yeah, I'll sort of continue on that. In the context of virtual production, if we put up a still image, a plate of whether it's video or still, the parallax from the camera is fixed, right? If I move that camera, around it, I don't see behind an object, right? And if you're not doing a lot of left-right movement, and you're just kind of keeping the camera, you can get away with a lot, right? In a 3D environment, as we move the camera, it's rendering out. So if we bring the camera around a tree, we're seeing the other side of the tree and what's behind the tree and stuff like that. And so in virtual production, part of it is it's not all one way or another. On a typical job, we may have 4 or 5 shots that we're using plates because of the maybe the camera motion, we're not going to see any parallax anyways.
Yeah.
And some of them, we have a big crane shot or a dolly shot and stuff like that. So a lot of, again, going back is sort of like, figuring out what is needed for this job to reach the creative goals, right? And it's, it's pretty typical to have, a 3D environment like we're in now, but there may be a bunch of shots that are just plates.
Yeah, I mean, if you remember like the violinist video that we showed earlier, like the camera was pretty locked off, it wasn't moving. But that has limitations too, where like we tried adding a second person in that scene and it kind of fell apart, and so it just changes based on the needs. I think, Kristyna, maybe you've worked from like kind of a different angle of virtual production. Can you describe a little bit of like your process in getting the scenes together for your, the green, I forget the brand, the client.
Oh, sure. The world I'm sitting in right now.
Yeah,
the
that one.
Energy project. Well, I think we were briefly talking about it, but I think the world of virtual production exists in, there's various levels of how deep you get into it. So you could just be wanting to avoid green screen in post because you don't have enough time for 100 cut downs. So you want to be able to bake it into your footage, and you can just put up a plate and you're not doing that much camera movement. for this project, for this commercial, for Green Mountain Energy, there was subtle camera movement. There was actually, we had this Scorpio arm that was passing through and this like the interior into the exterior and sort of connecting those worlds. So that was a very aggressive move to ensure that our camera was tracking with it. And that required, the full Unreal team and camera tracking. And like, that's like the souped up virtual production experience. But, I think things come up where I'm pitching virtual production where I don't need all of those things, where we have very subtle 2.5D, parallax that we need, that we don't really need to have the entire team there. And I'm sure that, especially obviously we're at the studio, you have many different approaches to virtual production. But for this job, it was the perfect production solution because we needed about 20 different locations to showcase the brand that they speak to many different clients all over the US. So it was really important to make sure that we had a variety of landscapes that were visible through the real sets that I was building in front of the wall. So for me, it's so exciting because I always come from like a practical in-camera point of view, and to be able to see it and light with the wall is like game changing, especially for the client that, just to be able to visualize everything is really exciting process. So yeah, I think just for that aspect of the in-camera VFX that you're getting is just really exciting.
Yeah, for people that don't know about like the 2.5D workflow, if you've ever played like a side-scrolling video game, you've got like your background, and then you've got, let's take Donkey Kong while I'm dating myself a little bit, but like, you've got Donkey Kong running through the forest, he's running on something, right? That's one plane, and then you have the background kind of moving behind him, giving you this like parallax illusion. That's like 2.5D. Yeah. That's a really good example of that.
A good example.
Ross, I always akin it to a pop-up book. It's like the very simple way. It's like the old pop-up books you'd buy and you'd look, and there's always like the flat planes living in three-dimensional space. That's how I usually describe it to people. It seems to make sense.
Cool. Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, Patty.
Yeah, hi. So I have a question.
Hold on a second. He's going to give you the microphone. We are remote people. Got to hear you. Otherwise, you got to hear me talking again.
Can you hear me? All right.
Yeah.
So I had a question related to the Alabama rocks that you just mentioned, and creating a 3D space. Because I'm an agent as well, and we are always dealing with usage and rights and all those things. Are you able to create these environments like that without a location permit? Like, is there a concern about an infringement of creating an environment that exists without having a permit to shoot it or make a 3D? That was the first thing I thought of. Was, well, does he have a permit? Can he do that?
I think
I don't know if that relates to you and you.
That's probably a good question for.
Yeah, I think it depends on, permits are so ordinance-based and local, specific to the locations. Half the time permits are there just to ensure that you're not crowding a space at a busy time. So it's more about managing the location versus monetizing the location. Other places literally want you to get a permit so they can make money off of it.
That's what I was going to say. Could they sue him for creating this environment of the rocks that they later got used in a background for a Lexus commercial or whatever?
It's harder to sue for. It's a commercial purpose, and like I said, it becomes very kind of contractual and local ordinance law versus broad. They don't own the rock. They don't. They might own access to it, but certainly, if I went out and took pictures and disseminated them, they couldn't come after me.
Right. Yeah, that particular space is used commercially quite a bit. It is a public space. It's a scenic area. It's not a protected area. I tread lightly because I don't want to ruin it. It's pretty beautiful, but yeah, certainly if I wanted to license that scene to people, I would probably have to make some phone calls, and
Yeah, to me, it's always a fine line. It's like, it's one thing if you're, a publicly identifiable thing, like you're scanning something that people would know what it is. To me, that's very different than a generic rock, a generic mountain, right? Because it's sort of like, I think back of like all the sky replacements that we do, in a post house, right? Can somebody tell me like identify that cloud, right? Is different than, something that clearly is publicly identifiable.
And for me, like it wasn't really to create an asset that I could leverage and make a ton of money off of. It was trying to figure out the workflow a little bit and like how I could actually do that. So if I got a call that was like, hey, we're gonna shoot, they shot that, there's a famous Toyota ad that was like Keeping Up with the Joneses, where it was like Leslie Jones, Tommy Lee Jones, and then like Nick Jonas. And there's another person, actor in that, I don't remember her name. No, it was Leslie Jones. Yeah. But like, the joke is like, keep up, kid, and he shows it, and it's like, who is this guy? But like, they filmed that in Alabama Hills, and it would be interesting. I'm sure they shot it with green screen or some other process, but it's used a lot. So the idea of doing, it's also just kind of a cool place. Right. So the idea of like, seeing if I could go out and create a digital twin of this thing and figure out that workflow was more the purpose. It also was a great excuse to go out west and hang out for a couple of days.
Yeah, right.
Cool. Oh, yeah. Hey, Ian.
I think one of the things that we talked about is like trying to figure out the math on when to use what level of virtual production, right? And part of that is a lack of familiarity with all the pieces in the workflow. Right. Oh yeah, I'm supposed to wait. Is there people at home I need to repeat this for?
Yeah.
I think one of the things, if you are producing or directing and you're trying to figure out if virtual production is what you should be doing, it's hard to figure out what the math is, how to do the math on like, I know how to do this practically, right? I know what this would look like in the real world, but maybe I could do something more with virtual production. But maybe I don't have 20 hours to spend figuring out if I should do it with virtual production versus sticking with what I know. Todd, what are some of the best use cases right now for virtual production? What are the perfect projects we should be coming to you with? And if we don't know, how can we figure out?
Yeah, there's a couple ways to answer that. First is learning about virtual production and what it's good for and what it's not, right? I definitely say there's like what I call the low-hanging fruit, car driving plates, things like that are really straightforward, right? When it comes to car driving plates, virtual production is always a very intriguing way to go. But in the end, you need to find resources, whether it's Framestore or Resolution or Miller Creative. There's a lot of people out working on this. Having a relationship where you can call and sort of spitball and run an idea about it. I mean, every week we get somebody like, hey, here's a shot that we're trying to do. But whether to do it or not really comes down to cost and logistics. And there's advantages to virtual production that aren't super apparent that sort of surprise even us who've been doing this a really long time. We did a bunch of shots on Paper Girls, a year or two ago. And it originally came to us because, the main talent is a minor and it was a stunt and a stunt double, and it made sense to shoot, in our studio from a safety standpoint. But the producers quickly found out that, the main actress who's a minor, 80% of her shots are at night. And at night you get her for like 2 hours for SAG regulations or 6 hours during the day. And they quickly figured out, oh my God, we just gained 4 hours of our lead talent. And that was sort of like, so the scope kept expanding. That was not something I ever thought of. Yeah. There's people go to virtual production because you're trying to shoot an environment that's just not practical. Airports, jails, it's almost impossible to shoot in a jail. Factories. Oil things that logistically are hard. There's also areas where it's a cost issue, depending on the amount of coverage. I mean, we've done, I think the most we ever done was 9 locations in one day. That's impossible with a single crew. So a lot of times it's budgetary. There's so many different ways that virtual production can save costs. I don't even know if we know all the ways yet because we keep discovering one. we had an actress, Bridget Everhart, for Somebody Somewhere. It was driving plates, really straightforward. And she has like sort of a nervous breakdown, but a very emotional scene. And she reached out saying, listen, I can get into this role, because she's really more known as a comedian, making a break into thing, but I can't, get in and out of that emotional state all day long as we're setting up for reverses and stuff. And, the fact that she could get into that performance, stay in it, and we just flip the world around to shoot her out, get her reverse, get the react. You know what I mean? That was also something that we're like, of course, in hindsight, it's 2020, but that wasn't the goal. But it was definitely something that was a huge benefit.
Yeah, there's. I think one of the things that gets overlooked a little bit is very specific things. So like the Barbie movie is a good example. Probably one that you've all seen. The opening sequence is like it's a dupe or like a homage to Space Odyssey 2001. Yeah. And like they're able to take little girls out into the desert instead of guys in monkey suits, right? And you couldn't do that. Like there's so many laws against that. Yeah. But they specifically can like shot for shot like recreate that movie that's almost 30 years old, 40 years old. And like pretty close. So like for those two reasons, that's why that was a good thing. I mean, all the Barbie movie essentially is. I'm
sure Lawrence and some of our remotes can comment on this, but like I would say a good 80% of the jobs that come our way, the production company bids it out to do it for real on location, or versus is doing it in virtual. And it's such a complicated. I always say the hardest part of virtual production is bidding the job, because there's just so many factors that you have to consider. It's not always really cut and dry.
Yeah, I agree, and it's really hard because when we deal a lot with agencies, right? So they'll sort of give us their boards, but they're not the director's board. Right. So they're very broad. So for me, I'd like to take the storyboards and then disseminate those and decide what should be virtual, what shouldn't be, and then what type of virtual content it would be. To your point, Todd, like 2D, 2.5D, or full-blown 3D. That all depends on the camera. Like what's the camera doing and what's the framing of the shot. So that's definitely a challenge for sure. But yeah, and that Barbie, we did that. Framester did those scenes. So.
Nice, they're great.
Not myself, but my counterpart in London did that. So it's pretty cool.
I would say if there's one thing that you walk away is that the shoot itself runs like any other shoot, but the normal cadence, the schedule of a shoot really hasn't changed all that much in a long time. But with virtual production, you have to get your studio and whoever's creating the volumes involved much earlier. If somebody calls me tomorrow and wants to shoot on Saturday, as long as the stuff's available, we can make it happen. If somebody wants to call and get a volume created, and like there's no amount of money that could make it happen unless those assets just happen to exist. So you're definitely taking budget from the post-production and moving it into pre-production, but you're also taking time. And we've actually turned down a lot of jobs that they really was the right project. They just called us 2 weeks too late, and then us being worried about not being able to deliver in the amount of time that we were given.
So I had a question for Daliah. Over here. Daliah, you were mentioning earlier your example of the water bottle in the grocery store, and it just got me thinking. If Andy Warhol were alive today and he used Midjourney to create his Campbell soup cans, would he be going to jail?
That's a great question.
Usually don't go to jail, by the way. They're usually civil lawsuits, so the worst case scenario is you have to give up lots of money, so if that helps you sleep at night, in most instances. And the answer, which you're not going to like, I don't know if you moved, is it depends. Yeah. And we've already discussed kind of the scope of what is considered human authorship and what is considered output. And even the Andy Warhol example, it's a case that went to the Supreme Court, and they're actually very litigious as a foundation. But the answer is maybe. Depends.
All right, we got maybe one or two more questions.
There you are.
I want to follow up with that with Richard Prince and this Sam Bell example of Marble Man. And Suicide Girls that he used on Instagram to resell. I mean, does the same argument fall for AI now that AI is a different?
So he asked.
I mean, that was the AI of the, the AI back then was, cropping or changing an image in a different way.
Yes and no. So Richard Prince is a notorious appropriation artist. He basically takes other people's things and slightly repurposes them and then calls it art. And he gets sued all the time because the question in almost all of his cases is what he created a transformative work or a derivative work? And for those who want to know the difference, well, there's no magic answer. Again, a derivative work is the Shepard Fairey Obama poster. That's another example of a fair use versus derivative, meaning I took an AP photo of Obama, I made it into an iconic poster, I added the word hope underneath. Is that derivative? AP said, yeah, you didn't do anything. You took an Obama picture and made it like just pretty in a block picture. That's derivative. Whereas had he taken that same poster, put like a Hitler mustache on Obama and said, fascist, that's an easier example of fair use. Right? I'm changing the nature and purpose of the underlying work. Richard Prince took people's Instagram posts, blew them up, and sold them. I mean, that's one of his, people paid $100,000 for it. It's incredible. And so in every single one of these copyright cases, if it's not a question of is it infringement, just straight up, it might be infringement, technically, but it is a transformative work, so it's fair use. Or, there's some reason why I should be allowed to use it. Regardless of whether, and you said, isn't it always AI? Isn't it the same thing? Like if I took a picture and used tools like Photoshop to change it? Was that kind of your question?
Well, I think back then that was considered the AI of that,
It wasn't the AI. So
it's not AI.
Right. The nuance is that you're saying it was the technology du jour that enabled things that weren't possible before.
Yes.
Correct. But what that technology did was allow you to alter an image or add to an image, like a Photoshop. The nuance with AI is that it's not necessarily altering an existing thing, because that's a more straightforward derivative case. Photoshop, I took this image and I changed it to the point where you can't identify the source. Is that still infringement? The answer would be yes. Yeah. Because you needed it necessarily to create the derivative, even though the derivative is unrecognizable from the original. Right. With AI, it's like, I did some research for you, and based on my research, here's my output. Is that the same thing as creating that derivative? And then the court will do a standard. Here's my water bottle, here's your water bottle. Are they substantially similar?
Yeah.
I've got a very technical question.
Sure.
So aside from using these as a background plate with a traditional cinema or film camera, if you're wanting to do something with lens metadata where the screen is partitioning itself based on what the lens is actually seeing, what kind of camera do you need to do that?
Can you just repeat the question? I just want to make sure I understand it.
So earlier you were showing where it's rendering in real time based on where the focal length and the angle of view is actually seeing.
Yep. Yeah.
I can't imagine I can take my iPhone and do that out of the box. So what kind of camera, what are the necessities I need in a camera?
Sure. Yeah, so the camera actually is irrelevant in that case because it's the camera tracking system that is doing that. That being said, large format cameras are definitely huge benefits, which is why, our go-to cameras in LF, Venice, Super 35, the larger format sensors, and there's, it's cameras that have to be able to be gen locked and things, meaning you can't use your iPhone, right? Any pro grade camera, you're fine. But, the triangulation of where the camera is and the lens data actually is more about the tracking system than the camera itself. We have an Arri Super 35 here with our tracking system on it. It could be an LF. It could be really any camera.
Yeah. So just to kind of distill that a little bit, there's things that are more important. So Genlock is a way to sync the screen and the shutter and the camera so that they're all in the game engine itself. So everything is moving seamlessly at once. And then the larger your sensor you have, the more you avoid Moire and things like that. And then also, as you focus on subjects in front of the camera, your depth of field fall off blurs the background, so you don't have pixels. Again, avoiding Moire, but also kind of completing that illusion, if that makes Does that help with that?
So the question was in terms of Moire. The biggest determining factor of whether you get Moire is the resolution of the tile. So this tile behind us is an extremely high res 1.9. The reason we went with that is it allows the camera to get closer to the wall and on wider lenses before you see Moire. Previous to our 1.9, we used 2.8, which is kind of the standard across the country. And by going from 2.8 to 1.9, it basically, allowed us to go for, significantly wider, but at half the distance. And so a lot of that depends on the needs. In Hollywood, where maybe they're doing a set extension, but that LED wall is really far away, you can get away with a lot lower res, more cost-effective tile. Given that the majority of our work is agency commercial work, we tend to be on a smaller stage, a lot closer to it, and so the 1.9 has huge advantages for us. That kind of goes back to, and anyone reach out to me afterwards, not all LED volume stages are the same. There's actually enormous differences between multiple studios, and you got to have a lot of conversations with them if you're price comparing. I have a friend at Burnett that he was working on a job and they triple bid the same job to studios in New York, Chicago, LA, and there was almost a $200,000 cost difference just between the studios, not because of creative differences, just because of the technical differences, and it kind of scared them away because they're like, it's a lot to understand, and you just, like anything, it's like, just because I have an LED wall doesn't mean it's appropriate for your job. It's hard to say good or bad. It's about what's needed for the job.
Well put. Yeah, Billy.
I was wondering, do we have an idea of the magnitude of outcomes for generative AI, if you were to say, create an illustration of a forest? Do you have an idea of how many different types of illustrations you can get? Are there millions? Are there only several?
I don't. Does anyone on the panel have an answer to that?
I have no idea.
I don't.
I think it's like endless.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. I'm kind of going back to the monkey selfie, and I'm thinking to myself, like, I've noticed there's like sort of this meme format that's like, show me a picture of a hot dog, and then it says, make it hotter, and then eventually it's like a hot dog on the
hot dog or not.
So I'm curious if you would agree that there's an art form to selection, like curating of the millions of outcomes of generative AI images. If I think that to an extent you can own an image because you can modify it. So if you were to say, like, I'm thinking like Pure Michigan, I guess this would be a lie, but as an example, Pure Michigan, and you say generate an image of a forest, and you say, well, I lived in Michigan, that's not Michigan. So show me another one, and finally you say that is Michigan, that photo. So I'm thinking, like, is there an art to selection, and can you own the idea if you really, I guess, modify it or select it through a large number? I'm sort of thinking out loud, I suppose.
That's the question of human authorship, and that was when we started it out. The more work you had to do to create that environment, then the court will probably say you created that environment.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, just like open source, everyone was worried about open source code for a while I'm still in that space. What's happened, though, is that there are services now around the free thing. You'd be surprised how many people call, and Chris and I just talked about this. We will be, for $2,000 a month, we'll handle your prompts. And you're like, okay, cool, or let's go even further back, when Facebook was a big deal. Right now it's the new ones, but I had clients come to me and say, I'd like you to review this social media marketing agreement for me. And I was like, okay, what are they doing for you? They're going to create my account. And I'm like, well, it takes like 4 seconds, but they're going to manage it for me. And I would read the service deliverables, and because it was scary, the people were willing to pay for the service of this new scary thing. Maybe I have, it becomes like HR, recruiting, yeah, I can get lots of hot dog photos, but I need someone to sit there and look at them all and tell me which one the best one is. New job, right? So I wouldn't be so concerned about the ownership aspect. So many things, the concept, I should say, of lots of these things is not protectable already, right? The idea of taking a picture of a man standing in a forest, all of us could take that same photo, and they would look pretty similar because we're all in this room and taking that same photo, and we'd all own a copyright to our iteration of it. So you can't monopolize the concept merely by owning it, if that helps.
Can I weigh in on that also really quickly? So it takes me hours, literally hours, and hundreds of renditions to get to a point where I feel like I've achieved my creative goal in using Midjourney, and then I'll post the image as being finished in my mind. So it's incredibly involved and quite a process getting to the point where I feel like, okay, this is it, I've done it. This is what's resonating with me.
And I would say that's
hundreds. It's endless how many different versions of a concept you can come up with Midjourney, and then how deep you can get in fine tuning the images that you're working on.
And from a risk standpoint, the more you're fine-tuning, the more you're obfuscating, can't say that word, the original source, right? Like if I got a New York Times article output and I wanted to put that on my page, well, obviously that's substantially similar or copied from the New York Times. But if I keep tweaking the words and massaging the prose, it's gonna be harder to find me and sue me.
Fantastic. We have one last question here. I want to kind of reboot so we can put the thing back up and we get answer kind of Q&A informally. Anyone else?
All right.
All right. Well, thank you, panelists, for joining us.
I got a quick question.
Thank you very much.
Can they stay?
We got one last one.
I mean, there's so many different avenues
Yeah,
that we could go down with the AI stuff, but one thing that wasn't touched upon was, I think all of us are image makers, so we didn't really get into the writing and the actors and everything that happened with that. But what about with the AI? There's a certain amount of hallucination that occurs. Is that something that you guys have had to deal with, especially on the legal side of things?
Can you reiterate that question?
I think it's been called AI dreaming, AI hallucination. Oftentimes when you give it a certain set of parameters, it will output something that's completely random and not out of reality. So I know that there's been a couple cases on the legal side of things where I know a couple lawyers where there was a case and then it referenced something. Someone went to court, there was a thing, and they used ChatGPT and it created something totally out of
It referenced case law that didn't exist.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. So, and I know we're all image makers, and that that's kind of a little bit out of. But I think that it's something to kind of think about, like how much do we put faith into this AI, and what is the end game here? Like, what is the convergence of this AI? We live in a very exciting time. I think all of us as human beings living in this time right now, where there's a convergence happening. And I mean, is there a expiration date on what we do? Because I mean, how soon will all of this become VR? Like, when will this all be obsolete? When are we just going to be putting on glasses and it's all right here? Anyway, that's a little bit much, but
I mean, I think that's a lot of overlapping ideas, and they're all valid. I think I'm just going to throw my own opinion about what might be happening media-wise out here because it's fun. But between virtual production and video games getting where they're at, and media and the new Apple headset and all that stuff, I think eventually we're going to be moving towards this dream that I had as a little kid, where you were actually a part of the movies, right? Even wow, the nerds are really going to love this one, but like Cyberpunk 2077, you have people like Keanu Reeves and Idris Elba in the video game that were scanned, dropped in, and you can interact with them, and that's a step closer to I'm in the movie, and I think games are going into kind of film production, game technology. So I think it's all kind of overlapping, and we'll somehow close that loop eventually. So that's my hot take.
All right. After a short bio break and stuff like for us up here on stage, we're definitely going to be around to answer lots of questions. Yeah. So please reach out to anyone here, and if you're interested.